Let's do a little hello. Hello, React Alicante. How are we doing? Woo! Alrighty. Hi. My name is Jared Palmer. Today we're going to talk about taming forms in React. But before we do that, quick shout out to our sponsors. And thank you to our organizers. Big shout out. They're doing an awesome job. All right, so let's get into it. So I'm Jared Palmer. I am the lead engineer at the PALMER Group. We are a strategy, design, and engineering firm based in New York City. So how many New Yorkers are here? Whoa, okay, cool. So we're a small yet mighty team, and we help Fortune 100 companies solve really challenging problems, whether that's digital transformation, taking a physical rock and turning into this cloud infrastructure, or building internal dashboards, React apps, whatever it is, we sort of are the fixers. So that requires a decent amount of innovation. And I'm a firm believer in scratching your own itch, and that's one of the things we'll be covering today. And so in doing all that and in service to our clients over time, we've accumulated a bunch of tools. And all these tools are in service to that end. And so these are some of my open source projects. Formik, which we're going to get to later. React Functions, which is this sort of tool belt of React utilities that wrap imperative browser APIs. After.js, which is a lot like Next.js, but based on React Router. Razzle is a little bit different. It's a build tool set for server-rendered React apps and actually any kind of JavaScript application. But the key there is universal, because maybe SEO is important, or you've got dynamic rendering. So that's Razzle. And then Backpack is a similar setup, but that's a turnkey another zero config tool for Node back-end projects, basically. So yeah, these are all in service, though, to solving other problems. And all of my open source work is to that end. These are just means to an end. So what are we going to talk about today? First, I'm going to talk about one of these problems. I'm going to discuss the solution that I came up with and some insights about what I've learned over the course of the last year with this particular solution and how it's grown. So forms. Yeah, that's right. Forms are hard. Forms are extremely challenging. Oh, did we lose? Forms are hard. So hard that they crash your presentation. All right, so yeah, forms are challenging. Eric did a great job yesterday of going through why they kind of suck. They're in every app. It's some fundamental transformation of like a user's knowledge into your database somehow. So they're really important, and they're really easy to mess up. And I was tasked with building this pretty large dashboard for one of our clients. It had a bunch of crazy business logic. And I had looked at all of the other solutions out there for forms in React, and wasn't super pumped about any of them. But just a quick refresher on how forms are handled in React and why forms are so hard in React. This is basically the summation of the React documentation on forms. It's about, okay, that's not fair. But basically, this is how you handle forms in React. The fundamental unit of this is this change handler, handle change. You've all seen that. We get an event, and we pull the value off the event's target, and we store it in state. And then we wire it up by passing our state to our inputs and this change handler. And if we get smart, the second part of the React documentation is really about like controlled inputs and controlled components, right? And then you get this really smart bit about using an ES6 computed property for event.target.name. And this takes the HTML attribute. We're going to look at this in a second when I start coding, but takes the HTML name attribute, and it uses that as sort of a key to decide what part of state we're going to update. And this allows us to share this change handler across multiple inputs. Okay, that is the documentation of forms in React, and the rest of the issues that you're faced with when building a complicated, large application, that's up to you. So what are these problems that you're going to run into immediately? Wiring up state, validation, error messages, maybe internationalization. Just staying organized, right? Doing something for one form versus 30 forms is very different. Testing, right? And also, last but not least, not bashing your face against your keyboard. These are all very important things that are left up to you, which is cool because React is just the view, right? So they're not going to tell you how to do your business logic. And the idea with React is that it's declarative. You focus not so much on the how, but the what, right? And the rest is left up to you. So Formik. So I looked at, it's flashback to 2017 or so, and Redux is everywhere, right? And I was maybe an earlier person on that was like, I don't know so much about this Redux stuff. So I was building this large administrative dashboard, and I was like, we're not really using Redux on this project. I don't really want to lean on Redux form or one of the other, or like integrate with like MobX or anything like that. I just want to use React. I just want to use something simple, and I want it to be like no magic. So this, so basically I decided to try to build something, and I did build something. It's called Formik, and we're going to get into it in a second. And a year later, it's been downloaded 1.5 million times. It's used all across the board, from startups from Walmart to startups all around the world. And I'm pretty proud of the project and where it's come and where it's going. And I want to show you and teach you Formik a little bit of it at least, and why, and maybe just a little bit about how you might use some of the goal, aim for the similar goals that I did, and how you may be able to apply those to your own projects going forward. So we're actually going to look at Formik by building it, okay? So before we get into building it, we got to just talk a little bit about some insights about form state. Yes, our prophet Dan Abramov said this. Praise be he. Form state is a local and ephemeral, right? So what does that mean? That means that you don't necessarily need an external state management system to sync up your forms. The way I like to think about forms, it's like a big, uncontrolled component. So the goals of Formik were pretty straightforward. Give back render control. Don't style people's stuff. Solve for the 80%. Okay, Formik was never meant to be used on every single form. And if you try to do it that way, you may run into some really wacky stuff. But similarly, we'll get into this in a second, because of this idea of just making components and staying within React, oftentimes if you have an issue using Formik, because it's just another React component, it's really because you're having an issue with React. The other goal was to ship something that had the battery pack included, right? I don't want to have to know every intricacy of implementation details or have to be using some state management system that I just discussed. And similarly, I wanted something that was incrementally adoptable, so that your next form could use this new thing, but the one after that doesn't need to. And I also wanted it to be incrementally deletable. So all the code, I wasn't so sure about it at first. So I wanted to make sure that, if it didn't work out, I could just delete it. And no magic. This is really important. We don't use a ton of observables on my team, and so I just wanted to use just React. So there's some really interesting things that happen, as I sort of talked about, when you just use React. When you just use React, some beautiful things happen. One, when React gets faster and they do some performance optimization, your framework or tool library gets faster too. Also, as I sort of mentioned, when people have issues with your component, oftentimes, there are definitely bugs, but sometimes it's just because they may or may not have a grasp of solving this problem with React. So that's kind of cool. The person who sort of inspired me to this is Michael Jackson, and we talked about, with React Router 4, how it is just a component, and he was telling me how with React Router 4, they really didn't want to reinvent the wheel. They wanted to just have it be a component and stay inside sort of the framework. So again, no external state management, no subscriptions or observables, no reinventing the wheel, no tiers. So let's start coding. All right, so we are going to build Formik real quick from scratch. So I'm cheating a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to go to the documentation from the React docs. We're going to copy in the last part of the example. It's this reservation thing, this reservation form. We're going to build Formik. And what you're going to see with this is how Formik stores state internally. And then after that, we're going to show you some cool stuff that you can do with Formik. And hopefully this will help you not only learn how to use Formik, but maybe apply some of these ideas to your own projects. Alrighty. So I copied this in, just believe me. So this is our form. And can we all see? Yeah, good, okay. This is our form. This is reservation. We can click number of guests. Cool. This is a number input. Cool. And as I mentioned before, this uses the classic shared change handler technique. But when you stare at this, you're like, what does this have to do with reservation? And certainly if I could imagine this sort of boilerplate code here, like being reused on every single form, it can get kind of like gross and annoying. So let's build a render prop to encapsulate this change handler and maybe some other stuff too. So let's just do that real quick. Let's turn that guy off. Cool. Whoops. All right. So let's do this. So let's do, we'll call this MiniForming. Whoops. Component. And we're just going to return this .props.children and this .state. And we're going to spread this because we're going to do some stuff later. And let's just initialize state there. All right, so we want to just encapsulate and abstract away this change handler. And let's just wrap it so that we've seen it and set up. MiniForming, classic render prop. If you're not familiar with the render prop technique, I think there's a presentation later today on it. But basically, you pass a callback function to either children or another prop, and it gets executed during render. And so let's just start there. Cool. MiniForming. Cute. Okay, so what if we had like 3 reservation forms, or 3 forms like reservation? That's the goal here, right? We got to abstract away this handle change function. So let's move it. That makes sense. And let's bind it. Okay. So instead of storing state at the top level here, Formik does some other stuff. It keeps track of your values, your which fields have been visited, and the error messages. And it uses the same technique using this ES6 computed property to sort of key. It uses the symmetry to sort of key on which part of your form to update when things happen. So instead of just like storing this at the top level, what if we just kind of namespaced it to the part of the form state we want to store? So in this situation, what about we just call it values? And let's let people initialize that part of the state with something called like initial values. And we also want to keep track of which fields are visited, so we'll keep track of touched and errors. And now let's pass this handle change function back down. Cool. I am missing a value. Oh, initial. I did that during practice too. Thank you. All right. First mistake. All right, so this state is used. We want to make sure that our little mini format can be reused, right? So let's just grab this state and set it to initial values. And the reason for that is I didn't delete the constructor. So now I can delete that. Yes, that's a great error. Let's get our values back out of Formik, or MiniForming, I should say, through the render prop. And because of the symmetry, let's just replace this dot state, because now our state's held in the component MiniForming. And now we need to get this handle change function, which I decided to name things like they could be deleted so that they were just sort of conventional. So like handle change makes sense, and handle blur, and handle submit, and those are the things. So let's just keep it going. So instead of this dot handle input change doesn't exist anymore, let's just get handle change right here. But who knows what's wrong with this? This, not ideal. Why? Set state, exactly. So we need to persist this event, and we need to be a little more savvy in our update in our set state function. Because we've namespaced our values here, we need to mirror that sort of state in our update. So let's just use the updater version of set state and return an object. And this will be on values. Spread it. Okay, now we should be in business. Yeah. It's cool, so now we have MiniForming, almost. There's some other parts we should get into, like validation, handle blur. What's cool about handle blur, which will keep track of touch, is it's exactly like handle change, except that instead of a value, we're just gonna set it to true. And so instead of values, yep, we're gonna augment that. Yep, prevState.values. Thank you. So we'll set this to touched, and we'll do prevState.touched, and we'll set this to true. And all this is going to do is on blur, it's going to mark the field as touch, so true. And let's show how this actually works. So instead of doing this here, let's call this props, and we will return that. Fun times with render props and prettier. Right. Values, errors, touched, handle change, handle blur, equals props. And now let's just log out what we have here. Okay, so this is sort of how our form state looks. And as you can see, that's working out. We haven't wired up handle blur yet, so our touch isn't firing. So let's wire up our handle blur on blur, handle blur. Okay, so now we should see it, except that we didn't pass it back down. Handle blur. Handle blur. You know, I usually code in TypeScript, and so those kinds of mistakes don't happen. So there we go. We got touch working. So you can see we can keep going. We could do something like on submit, and that would fire off something like values. And let's do like, I don't know, alert stringify values. So now I can grab my submission function, I can co-locate it. So that was another thing. With Redux, sometimes you may be firing your form submissions from a completely different part of your application. And to me, I didn't always, while it can be useful, it can also lead to a lot of indirection. So with Formik, the idea is to co-locate all this stuff. So on submit, we can build our own handle submit. Right, we're going to prevent default. And before we submit, we would validate everything. We would set like, is submitting maybe? It's a good name for that, like that we're submitting so we can track that in state. And if we saw that there were no errors, we would continue with submission. And that's basically how submission works in Formik. But for this little MiniForming, we will just call stopprops.onSubmit. And let's just do this .state.values. And pass that down. Cool. And let's wire it up. So if we press enter, there we go. So there you go, that's MiniForming. And it's not very magical. The real version of Formik does, definitely don't just use this. Definitely use something more robust. This doesn't handle a lot of edge cases. It also doesn't use, it just uses state and props. And that's pretty cool and pretty powerful. And actually, you could finish this out by adding validation, handling resets, and stuff like that, and get pretty far. And that's actually basically how Formik v0 worked. It didn't even use context. But as the new create context API came out, and as you can see, even this code down here, this wiring up of handlers, can get a little repetitive, right? So context is kind of nice because you can implicitly pass props without having to write them out. So wiring up these change handlers and values and stuff, that was one of our goals, to sort of cut down on the annoying. And so through context, you can build a component like a field, which you may, which you can guess what it does. It gets these props through context and allows you to render them or add them to an input. And it too could use render prop. So that's our little mini Formik. And now I want to show you real Formik and build something pretty cool and show you the rest of the API. Alrighty. All right. So we are going to build an invite friends form because I'm lonely. I need more friends. Okay. So this is our goal. I've imported Formik, which is a bigger, more badass version of what we just built. Very similar API. I've already sort of coded up this initial values. And Formik is pretty flexible and powerful in that it can handle nested nastiness like this. One of the things that is really annoying to me about forms without a helper, if you're doing it just in React by itself without any helper, is that oftentimes you have to decide to flatten your React state. And what I mean by that is you have to flatten out into a just key value, or you have to use like some sort of immutability helper or some really crazy set state updaters, and it can get kind of gross. So one of the things with Formik that you can do is like deal with nested values and arrays, which was if you've ever written the code to manipulate arrays in a form, you know that you basically have copied the last time you did it, and you just copy that. It's just exactly the same thing. It's all boilerplate. So that's some of the stuff that we want to build with Formik. So let's build this invite friends form. But this invite friend, the inspiration for this comes from Slack, when you like add people to a channel in Slack. So what we're going to be able to do is we're going to have name and email, a remove row, and we're going to have like an add row, and then an invite. And then we'll use another component with DraftJS to draft our message. Okay, so here we go. So first, let's do some layout. Row dot call times 3. And let's start with some fields. Let's just do one row first. So Formik field. It is going to do the same thing that it's going to take handle change, handle blur, and value. It's going to get that off our Formic context or Formic state and the parent Formik component. And if you don't do anything, it's going to render a input by default. But if it too has a render prop. And everything is still kind of keyed off that HTML name attribute. It still works the same way. So all I need to do is pass this a name. And we're going to call this name for the person's name. And all the attributes pass directly through. And let's do one for email. And we'll make this type email. And we're going to have a button. And we're going to make sure we call this type button. I'm just going to just put a X there for now. And yeah. So that's starting to look like a form. We need some more stuff. So as I mentioned, through context, I could get all this stuff like handle change, handle submit, handle reset off from the render prop directly. But because I'm lazy, and so are you probably, you don't want to do that all the time. So let's just grab Formik exposes a form component, which is exactly what you think it is. It's just form, handle submit, on submit, and pass it all through. And that's not going to work. There you go. And let's make sure that the Formik keeps track of is submitting, and let's make sure that this thing can't be submitted. Type equals submit if it's already being submitted. Disabled. Invite, right? And let's make another one. For add friend. Cool. So we're almost there. And this will work. And I want to show you what this kind of looks like. I made this debug component. It's kind of nice. So this little debug component that I built the other day is just hooks into Formik context and prints it all out. So this is sort of where we are here. Little back buttons there. Sort of where we are. Formic state. We have values. We have our friends. We got errors. We got is submitting. I mentioned this was like a little more robust than our little mini example. We have is validating. Important. We have submit count. Is the form dirty? Is it valid? We keep track of initial values. And then some props, like should we validate on changes? Should we validate on blurs? Pretty cool. Something you definitely don't want to roll on. You could roll it on your own, but thank goodness you don't have to. Okay. So let's get back here. Okay. And just to prove, so what's cool about these field components, and these are directly from Formik up here, is that they too are render props. So they render an HTML by default, but if you pass it a render prop, or let's just use child as a function because that's all the rage these days, right? It gives field, which is on change on blur value, and form, which is exactly the same as this variable, but it just is provided to you down here. And let's do an input, and let's spread field. And we're going to get to exactly the same place we were at, except this now needs to be refactored and moved down. Placeholder, Jane, Doe. Jane's my friend. And sure, let's just sort of show you this. This will be jane@example.com for placeholders, because placeholders are good. Cool. All right, so we have a problem, though. If I type into this, and I press invite, what do we notice? We're not really inside of our array. or down here. This name is, can we see that? It's like down there. It's not synced up. And we could make it kind of synced up really quickly, though. So Formik supports Lodash like dot paths. So how many people here have used Lodash or like Lodash for craziness, right? Cool. Lodash is pretty cool. So you can do this. And now if I type into this name, and I press invite, now we're in business. But what if I want to add more friends? Well, as I mentioned before, like Formik takes care of the annoying, so you don't have to. So I'm going to use a component called field array. And this component takes a name prop, and it's going to be the slice of Formic State that I'm interested in, where the array lives. So that's going to be at friends. And it's going to give me back all those little array helpers and manipulations that you don't want to write, like push and, push and remove. And then all I need to do is wire that up to the buttons that are required there. I think I'm going to need a fragment here. Let's just make sure. Yep, I am. So we have push and remove, and let's make sure push works by passing it to our, I don't need that there, on click. And when I press add friend, I'm just going to add an empty friend, which is kind of a sad thought, but it's a lonely, empty, sad friend. Email. And that's cool. And when I press this X button, it's going to remove it. But it's going to remove at an index, which for this first one is great because it's just 0, right? But how do I get this list to sort of work? So what you can do is, we're just going to leave that at index real quick. We're just going to grab values off the top, and we're going to map through that. So let's do values.friends. And we could be defensive, like values.friends.length greater than 0, and values.friends.map. Not that map, another map. We sort of start to do this first. And we do friend, index. Okay, now we don't really need this friend. We really just need this index. So we want to map through it, and we're going to use that index right here. Is submitting is undefined because I did that. Is error 2. Okay. Cool. So now I'm going to get that index, right? And now I'm going to add it to, I'm going to be able to remove at that index. And let's just see if this works. Hey. Nice. So, but we still need to fix this. So instead of hard coding the value of the name attribute, name prop, I'm going to compute it based on the index. And I'm going to grab name off that, because that's what our form state looks like over here. And I'm going to steal this line of code. I have an extra $sign, I do. We're going to steal this and just drop this here. And instead of that, we're going to do .email. I like that. That works. Does that work? Yeah. Add friend. Okay. Almost there. We got to validate, though. Right? This is like half the battle. So Formik is pretty lenient into how you can validate. There's 2 ways or 3 ways. 2 ways, really, at the top level. There's a validate prop, which is BYO, bring your own validation. It works pretty much how you expect it. You get the values, you return some object, and that becomes errors. The suggestion is for that object to match perfectly the shape of your values. This symmetry is important because remember that mental model we had of just like slicing out state using the name prop. So it's easy if your errors match the shape of your values and touched. But when I built Formik, I looked, and when our team was working on it, we took a huge survey of all of the available validation libraries out there. And we looked at a bunch. We looked at LGTM. We looked at some schema-based stuff, JSON schema. And we found this library from Jason Quentz, jQuentz on GitHub, called Yup. And how many people here have used Happy.js and know Joy? Joy? Okay, cool. How many people here have used prop types? Probably everybody, right? So what's cool about Yup is it uses a builder pattern, which is when you chain functions together. And it allows you to write really expressive validations in a really concise syntax that looks a lot like prop types, so it's feels Reacty. Again, you don't have to use this. You can just roll your own, but we really like this. And so we built into Formik just like a special prop just for this kind of thing. It's called validation schema. And I'm going to import Yup. And it's kind of nice. Yup.object. This should feel familiar. Friends. And friends is going to be yup.array.of. More Yup objects. Yup.object. Name. Yup. This is all worth it, believe me. Yup.string. We'll make name required. And what's cool about Yup is right where you call the part of the builder that will be responsible for validation, you can just put the error message, so it's required. And for email, we'll do yup.string.email, and if that's an error, we'll call it invalid email. We'll say invalid email. And we'll also make that required, and we'll write our own little required string there. And now, though, we need to render our errors. So Formik provides us at the top level up here, as well as touched. And that's all nice and great. And the way that we show errors, and you probably want to show errors, is you only want to show an error if a user has already visited and touched a field. Error, yeah, true. Error. It's all at the top. What are we doing here? Why is string at the end? The text message. Oh. Required? Whatever. Let's leave it. It's more fun anyways. All right. Cool. So let's keep going. All right. So where were we? We're gonna show our errors, and either I didn't understand that, or we're just gonna move on. I don't know. So Formik, you could do this like errors.friend and go all and just like defense. Like you have to pull this out now, because remember in Formik things sort of match. So to help you out with this, there's a nice component called error message that just does this sort of get thing, and all you need to do is pass it the exact same thing you pass to your field. And it takes a render prop too, because I love render props and they're so good. Let's just do it like that. And it's not going to render until, again, you blur and you visited. And there's an error. Sweet. So let's just copy that, and we're almost out of here, folks. Let's copy that down. We change this to email. And now we have line by line, row by row validation. Yeah. Sweet. And you can sort of see, this back button's got to get out of my way. These are my error messages, and these are what's touched. These are my initial values. It's a lot of stuff. It's kind of nice. But that's great, but we've just been rendering like basic inputs so far. So Formik, because it kind of mimics React, and that was my goal, was just mimic React, use React to sort of feel like React, and I wasn't, again, sure of it all when I was building it, like we were sort of building it the first time, that we want to make it really easy to delete. And by making it really easy to delete, we also wanted to make sure that there were like imperative escape hatches. React has a bunch of imperative escape hatches that we all love, so does Formik. So instead of just passing handle change, there's equivalent imperative handlers that you can call and helper methods. One of them is called set field value, and another one's called set field touched, and another one set field error. And these were meant to be very easy to call search and replace on and delete because I wasn't sure, right? So these come in handy when you are working with third-party components that maybe you didn't write. I don't know about you all, but I love the open source community, and I used a ton of other React components that our team doesn't write. One of those being DraftJS, which is about to show you right now. But this works with this technique I'm about to show you works with any custom input, and is really powerful because it shows that by just focusing on orchestrating the form and the business logic of the form itself, and then giving you the right escape hatches, you can you can become compatible with any sort of input. It doesn't matter. And that's cool because Formik, by using this technique, Formik works anywhere React does. It works in React Native. It works in React DOM. It works in React VR. It works in whatever the next thing is that React's going to render to, like Excel or whatever. Or like toilet paper. I don't know. Like, that was the first thing that came to my mind. But so what's cool, so you basically get these things, these imperative helpers, set field error, set field touch, set values, and actually there's a sneaky one called set Formic State if you really know what you're doing. So we need to use set field value, and we're going to add our little message thing up here. We're going to use DraftJS to do that. But I cheated a little bit because DraftJS is a little, you don't have time for all of it. So let's just take our only part that I don't remember by off the code. Okay, so editor state. We're going to create some new editor state from DraftJS. It's going to make our little Formik thing less useful because this is how DraftJS initializes its state. Don't worry about it, though. All right. This rich editor example, let's just look at it real quick. I copied this right from the DraftJS docs. This is nothing custom here. It's going to take an onChange prop, okay, that we're going to provide from Formik. It's named onChange because it's mentally like easier to deal with. It's going to use it all over the place. And this is DraftJS. If you haven't used DraftJS, it's a pretty cool tool by Facebook for their rich editor, text editor component. But I think they use when you make status updates. I think that was the goal. It's got tons of stuff. We're going to use it as an input to send a message to our friends. So just hand waving this file. Trust me, I just copied it. Okay, big copy. Copy pasta. Okay, we are going to array. Rich editor example. So above our field array of friends, we're going to put in our rich editor example, and it's going to take onChange, and it's going to take set field value. And set field value, just if I wanted to call it, would take if we were calling it imperatively, it would take the name the slice of Formic State you want to update, and then the value. But we're going to handle that inside of our rich editor example component, and we're going to add on blur. And this actually works fine. We're just going to do handle blur. And then our value, guess what? Values.editorState. We don't have handle blur yet, so that's going to error. Here we go. Can't read content state of undefined. Where did we make a mistake here? Okay, hold on. Hold on here. Values editor state, set field value. Cheating. Almost had it. Okay. Error 3. Okay, so here we are. We have this rich text editor. And as I type, DraftJS will save, and it's a full rich text editor. I can highlight it and stuff. And this is all DraftJS. Nothing about this is from Formik, but pretty cool. And Formik will keep that state. Okay, let's get weird. Okay, and I can still have this add friend. Let's zoom this out a little bit. Add friend, and I still am keeping in. Everything is the same. I just added this input, this third-party input, and all I needed to do was pass in some of Formik's imperative helpers, some of Formik's normal helpers, and in my custom component, I'm just calling, this is set field value, so this would have been set field value, right? But we're calling it on change so that it can be reused. So that's how you work, that's how you take a third-party input that you didn't write and you copied from some documentation or Stack Overflow and use it with Formik. And this is what I wanted to show you here was a real-world example of how that sort of works and show you just how flexible this kind of, not just render props are, but also how flexible APIs like this can be. So that's the demo. And so what I wanted to conclude with here, is, let's go back to Keynote for a second, some final closing thoughts. So when you're building tools like forms, or you have something that's really annoying, or you think you have a problem and you are thinking about rolling something on your own, do it. It's likely you guys are all really smart people, and it's very likely that if you solve a problem in a certain way, that other people will find that interesting. I just urge you to publish those solutions, seriously. Don't just keep it on your computer, share it with the world. You'll be surprised about how many other people also care about this or have that problem and are interested in helping. Over the course of the last year or so, it's been remarkable to see all the contributors jump in and expand Formik and take it to places that I didn't even think of. So scratch your own itch. Also, stand on the shoulders of giants. Nothing is new under the sun. Everybody's done something like it before. And draw inspiration from anywhere you possibly can. And then don't try to solve every single edge case. Don't do it. Just solve for the 80%. And that's really important. You're never going to get to something that can work everywhere for everything, and that's okay. You just got to be comfortable with that. But if you solve for the 80%, you will find that you are probably going to not use that sort of generic solution anyway, because 20% of the time you do need something very, very specific. And then last but not least, make it really easy to adopt and really easy to delete. No one is going to rewrite their application to use your tool. What was, I think, mission critical to Formik's success is that it was incrementally adoptable. It didn't require external state management. It didn't require you to buy into that. So that once you npm installed Formik, you could use it on your next form. And because form state is inherently local and ephemeral, and we think about Formik as like an uncontrolled input, an uncontrolled component, you don't have to then use it on your next form, or you can. that's the sort of flexibility there. So I urge you, if you're interested in open source and you want to produce something that other people will use, just make sure you can adopt it and make sure you can delete it really easily. And the rest will take care of itself. So I hope today you learned a little bit about Formik, how I think about Formik, how Formik kind of works, and how you might use it in your own application. And I just want to say you guys are all awesome. And thank you to React Alicante for inviting me here. And any questions, I'm sure I'm around the rest of the day. So thank you all very much. One question? Sure. Questions?
Thank you very much for presentation. Very, very interesting. Yeah, thanks for these recommendations. And I actually wanted to ask you for like one more recommendation. What you would recommend for other people who are authors of form management libraries? Maybe some pro-advanced tip.
Oh, did you say that last part one more time? Could you repeat the last part?
Yeah, I mean some more advanced recommendation. What should we focus on?
I think you are the best person to answer that question. But I think that if it works for you, use it. There's no you don't get points for style, right? In this industry, you get points for shipping, and so shipping is perfection. Anything that helps you ship faster and better, use it.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask regarding the. So you said in 1 year the amount of Formik downloads just rapidly raised. Can you talk a little regarding any promotion you did for this library? Were it conference talks or like I have many examples of libraries that really solve the problem and do this very well, but they had 2 years of development and like 20 stars on GitHub, and no one knows it.
I am incredibly fortunate. Part of it is just luck. Part of it is writing really good documentation. It's really important to focus on that. I think that helps a lot. Some of it just comes down to how cool your logo looks, unfortunately.
Do you have, for example, friends in Airbnb who you recommend?
Oh, no.
And they say, okay, we'll use it.
I don't have like that many. I mean, I have friends. I'm trying to add more, as we just saw. But I don't have that many. Clearly, with this form, I was trying to help out, right? So, but no. So to answer your question, not really. I tweeted. It was July 4th. It was a summer day, and I'd been working on this thing for about a month, incubating it. And I blasted out a tweet, and it got retweeted, and other people found it useful, and it just took off. Again, sort of thinking about scratching my own itch and then sharing that with everyone else. There's nothing magical about it. You just produce awesome stuff and hope that other people think it's awesome, and if they do, fantastic. But I have to say, like, some of I think that some of my best work is like definitely not the most popular stuff that on GitHub. Stars are not the be-all, end-all. Yeah, just do stuff that works for you, and if other people find it useful, I mean, if stars or any metric, cool. But I think it's way cooler to ship awesome stuff. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Is that it? All right, cool. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it.